So with all of that, I move that Council Bill 2024-145 be amended by changing Section 5 to add a new subsection that reads as follows. For the purposes of this tax, the term community and neighborhood initiatives shall be construed to include, but not be limited to, housing and code enforcement. And you should have a copy of the written motion in front of you.
I would like to second that motion.
Motion has been made and seconded, is now in front of council for consideration. What questions or comments do members of council have? Mr. Hosmer.
Just to speak briefly in support of the amendment. You know, when you look at the chronic problems that Springfield has, whether it's majority of people renting in this city, the high poverty, one of the highest poverty rates in the state of Missouri, higher than the national average, high utility costs for poor people, chronic crime, neighborhoods that are deteriorating. Housing should be, and I think is, a priority with this council. I think the problem has been we haven't had the resources to do what we all know needs to be done. We need to inspect properties to make sure that they're safe and habitable. You look at poor neighborhoods in this city, we have high incidences of fires, we have high incidences of crime, and we have low home ownership. So, you know, we talk about our priorities a lot. We talk about quality of place. Good neighborhoods, good housing stock, people living in housing that's habitable and safe, that is quality of place. We talk about public safety. Law enforcement officers will tell you in bad neighborhoods with deteriorating housing stock, there's more crime. There's no question about that. Low property values. When one person, we had just heard a presentation at the last luncheon we had where they talked about when you work on these neighborhoods, some people don't want to invest because they've got a bad house next to them. That defeats the whole purpose of having neighborhoods, because you want to have neighborhoods that want to fix their homes, that want to have safe neighborhoods, that want to have safe streets. If we want to deal with these chronic problems, this is I think what we have to do. We have to put our money where our priorities are. And the one priority that I think takes care of a lot of these chronic problems that we've had for years, I've been on council 12 years. We've been talking about it for 12 years. We've been talking about crime. We've been talking about poverty. We've been talking about poor housing stock. We've been talking about bad and deteriorating housing. We've been talking about BDS, but we haven't done anything. And I think the community is ready and wants to have safe neighborhoods, safe streets, safe housing, and affordable housing in this community. So I think this not only is smart, it doesn't put it in the ballot, but it does put it for future councils to look at this as a priority. And if we're going to have this city the way we all want this city to be, the first thing we have to do is have safe housing, affordable housing, and people that aren't living in poverty. And the one way you do that is by giving them housing that's affordable or home ownership. So again, I know everybody on council, I hope everybody on council will support this amendment, because I think this is, otherwise it's a lot of talk, but no action. Thank you.
Mr. Simpson.
First, I want to thank everyone who came to speak tonight. Councilman McGall and I had the privilege of being able to serve on the Citizens Commission and see their work and the thoughtful deliberation that went into the proposal that is reflected in the bill that we see tonight. And I think it was a wise structure that group of citizens unanimously came around. The first part of that being a permanent solution to cap off the success story that is our old police and fire pension plan that went from the brink of insolvency to nearly fully funded. And this will ensure it gets the rest of the way and meets that commitment to those who have served our city. And second, to be able to start investing in those who are currently serving our city now in police and fire, and making sure we can get to full staffing as our citizens want and need with competitive salaries. I think that the other wise part of this is in the second structure of focusing the half cent with a sunset, with a strong citizen accountability measure to make recommendations, and centering it around our comprehensive plan, Forward SGF, which is the document that's had the single most citizen engagement of anything that we have worked on as a council, and is a document that reflects the priorities that we've all heard discussed today and discussed. On housing, there are a number of goals in Forward SGF, including to diversify housing choices, which we had a speaker who's on the Springfield Community Land Trust board, I think correctly point out, Springfield historically has not taken a good strategic approach to making sure that we can meet the housing needs of our community. I think he's right. You've seen work to try to change that recently. With the funding of the housing study to determine what types of housing we need, at what price points and what areas, and provide guidance on how we can address that. And you saw a small example of that earlier tonight, where a project was approved that met the missing middle housing capacity needs as identified by that housing study. Those sorts of housing additions are not always universally popular, as we saw also with that tonight, but they're needed in order to address the housing needs of our community, and that's an important part of Forward SGF. Providing healthy, accessible housing is a specific goal in Forward SGF. Includes examples such as Restore SGF, another of many projects and initiatives that the city is currently funding that we got to hear about recently, and hear the success stories that have already occurred with that program of families who have been able to purchase a home for the first time with the support of Restore SGF down payment assistance programs, and neighborhoods coming together to reinvest in their homes and build stronger communities around the funding for home renovations in Restore SGF. Springfield Community Land Trust has also specifically mentioned a program that's recently received funding through our federal ARPA funds that we allocated, and is mentioned in Forward SGF. But Forward SGF also mentions other goals that we've talked about today. It mentions making sure that our streets and sidewalks that people use every day to get to work or to school, and that has been clearly identified as a top priority by citizens on surveys, are something that we need to invest in. It mentions outdoor recreation initiatives such as the greenways, such as neighborhood parks, that let families and kids get out and enjoy the benefits of being able to play out in nature. That has an effect on quality of life and has an effect on the success of our future generations. It mentions transformative projects that also have a huge impact on what Springfield will be like for future generations, both in terms of quality of life, but also in terms of serving as catalysts for investments that increase jobs, and that also increase housing to meet the shortage that we have of several thousand housing units based on current supply versus the demand within our city. And I think it was very wise of the Citizens Commission. I think that's reflected in the unanimous consensus to reference Forward SGF as the guiding point for those citizen recommendations on what projects and investments that we should put money in with this half cent moving forward, because we spend a tremendous amount of time, and we had, again, the most citizen input we've had on any of our projects on that document. And to try to recreate those priorities, to try to recreate that citizen input without the engagement, without that time in a bill, I think is going to end up at best with a lesser substitute for what we already have from citizens, that identifies housing and allows for spending on housing, and also identifies priorities in these other areas. And so I think that this ballot initiative, I think that our decision on this bill is going to be the most impactful thing I think any of us on council do for all of these priorities that we've talked about. And I think that we position ourselves best for succeeding on behalf of the community if we listen to the Citizens Commission that made recommendations on this, and if we give voters the opportunity to vote on the structure that they recommended. So I'll be voting against the amendment to keep the bill in this existing structure.
Are there other comments? Mr. Jensen.
I would just note that I certainly appreciate the overview of all of the initiatives and recommendations that are included within Forward SGF. And the amendment respects that broad diversity of efforts that need to be addressed by the city by using the language to include, but not limited to, housing and code enforcement. It is absolutely apparent that there are a broad number of needs, and the Citizens Commission on Community Investment clearly reflected that, but they also clearly stated within their meeting and even within their presentation to us that it is our ability and our responsibility to provide whatever clarity we feel is necessary for not only ourselves, but for future councils and how to responsibly appropriate this funding opportunity should voters approve it in November, and this amendment be approved by council tonight. There are certainly a number of housing efforts that the city has made recently. I think you mentioned the housing study and the ARPA funding that's been provided, but all of those were primarily from one-time funding sources that we will not be able to rely on long-term. And if you look at the folks that have spoken to us for months, it is clear that our current resources are not meeting the need. And even with these new allocations of one-time funding, it is still not meeting the need. I'm not asking through this resolution or proposing that housing or code enforcement or any other initiative be prioritized above any other initiative, but recognizing the time and the place that our community is in, it's providing clarity to us, to the Citizens Commission that we would appoint with advisory oversight, and to future councils that we intend to do something about this issue. I would also just note that among the many things that were mentioned as recommended within the housing chapter of Forward SGF, specifically our proactive code enforcement and a rental inspection program. Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Just real briefly, I just want to, I agree with Councilman Simpson's comments. I don't really have anything to add to it. I think it's very well spoken that that a lot of time was spent on this. And I think that the consensus that they brought was a very positive thing, and I intend to vote no for the amendment.
Well, you got to keep in mind that this doesn't change the ballot language at all. This is just directory for future councils for how a future council is going to appropriate these funds, and it doesn't force any decision to be made. The commission was an appointed group. We are the elected representatives of the city of Springfield. It's not their vote that makes the decision. They made a recommendation to this council. This council has the ability to vote its conscience on what's best for the city of Springfield. We've talked about these issues ad nauseum, over and over and over again. Everybody says it's a priority. This gives us an opportunity to put our vote where we've been talking about what we're going to do for the city of Springfield. We don't let an unelected commission dictate what the policy is. I'm appreciative of their help, but our job, we've been listening to the complaints that we've had from constituents over and over and over again. The complaints we've had from law enforcement, BDS, economic development, neighborhoods. It's our job. It's not our job to say, oh, the commission did this, we're gonna rubber stamp it. It's our job to do what's best for our city. This is something, we're finally doing something that's actually going to address the core of the chronic problems that we have in this city. And if we don't, that's our fault.
Mr. Simpson.
So I think everybody in this discussion agrees, and I think it's very clear that housing is already covered in Forward SGF. This is the guiding document to this. There's not a substantive question as to whether housing would be an allowable expense. I think what my conscience tells me is that beyond respecting the citizens that served on this commission, I also respect the thousands of citizens that took their time to have a say in the creation of that comprehensive plan. And we may be elected officials, but I don't think that we should disregard that. And so to me, rather than kind of picking and choosing examples, going with the approach that was recommended by the Citizens Commission of providing the most detailed and most thoroughly vetted by the citizens, the people that we should be here to serve. Going with that as the roadmap provides the strongest guidance to both current and future councils in the allocation of this money. And that includes housing, that includes the other priorities that we've talked about. It doesn't substantively change the ability to spend. I think what it does do is it changes the source that future councils will use for guidance. And I prefer that source to be the one that was created by the people and reflects their vision and priorities for the future of our community, including on housing.
Ms. Horton.
So I'll just add two things. After we had our recommendation from the CCI, we have already made two amendments, one of which was Section 5, Section 5A, where we added specificity to public safety. I made comments on, hey, I define public safety well out of the bounds of just fire and police. And we took it upon ourselves to go ahead and amend that part. The other part that we did amend, which would be no different than this amendment that we're considering right now, is the section where it talks about the Citizens Advisory Board, where we did add above and beyond what CCI had recommended to us that, hey, not only will they be tasked with monitoring and reviewing the use of any revenue collected pursuant to this tax, but we added the part where they would make a recommendation and not just monitoring and reviewing. So we have already set a precedent to amend the ordinance after the CCI commission has made their recommendation. And I just feel as though this addition of Section 5B is a small measure of specificity. And the fact that we've already adopted quality housing as a priority, we know what the knowns are. And I think that there's just a little bit of anxiety that this ordinance will not have the type of specificity that it needs to say, let's tie this ordinance to housing and code enforcement so that it will give the people who actually go out and support this tax on the ballot some assurances and say, hey, they did put the proposal for the money where their mouth is. And so I just don't see this particular proposed amendment that Councilman Jensen has put forth as any different from Section A that we added, but also the specificity that we've added to Section 5C.
Mr. Jensen, then Ms. Carroll, and then Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. Could staff please pull up page 28 of the comprehensive plan and share it on the screen?
We're going to see if we can do that. I'm not sure we can pull the comprehensive plan up.
It's under Chapter 4, the community outreach section. I'm so sorry to make you do this, Steve. While you're pulling that up, I'll just describe what I'm looking at on my screen. It's the bubble chart of the public feedback that was received throughout the comprehensive plan process. And The size of the bubble generally equates to the amount of feedback that was received throughout the engagement process with the public, demonstrating how important those issues are to the community. When looking at this, there are certainly a range of issues that are in this bubble chart, but housing is two of the largest circles that are within this matrix, showing just how important this topic is to residents. And I think it's important to reemphasize that this is acting in alignment, direct alignment with the comprehensive plan. It is acting in direct alignment with the recommendations from the Citizens Commission on Community Investment. It is acting directly in alignment with the housing study. And at the end of the day, it is a definition within this ordinance. It is non-binding, but it provides clear guidance for this council and future council members as to where residents would like to see us investing these dollars. And I know these will be conversations we have during future allocations. But this is in alignment with everything that's been presented to us so far. And I just don't understand why we couldn't, at the very least, offer this definitional clarity to the 60% of renters in our community and everybody in our community who owns a house or lives here. I don't understand how we couldn't support that.
Ms. Carroll.
So for me, I do feel, and Councilman Jensen, you're correct about the housing, and I quite frankly don't really have a problem with the housing. The code enforcement is the thing on here that gets me, and I mean, because we're talking about it in committee and things of that nature, but I think that that part is just very specific, especially when we say police and fire departments. I think that that is still a pretty broad term, and I'm okay with the housing. I think that when we start talking about code enforcement, I think that that's more specific, and I think that leads people to further questions. And I think that when we're trying to get a ballot language to be passed, and I know this isn't the ballot language, but it's on there further, I think that we don't need to confuse people or make people question any further. That's just my opinion on the matter.
If you would like to offer a friendly amendment to remove the language that says "and code enforcement," I would be open to that. And I may need staff's guidance on this, but if you'd like to offer a friendly amendment that would modify my amendment to remove code enforcement and leave the language at shall be construed to include but not be limited to housing, etc., I would be amenable to that.
So if you're wanting to amend an amendment, we're getting really
You would have to amend the amendment.
Yeah, you're getting really fancy, but yes, you can do that.
Just two hopefully final quick points. One, the change to the citizens oversight group. That recommendation language was actually directly in the report and the recommendation from the Citizens Commission. It specifically mentioned that that group should be empowered to make recommendations. The bill language that was originally drafted didn't reflect that, and so the change was to include the committee's recommendation in that case. It wasn't a change from the committee's recommendation. And then I think the second thing is that Councilman Jensen, I appreciate you referencing Ford SGF in terms of housing being a priority in the bubble chart reflecting feedback. And that's one of the things that drove the fact that housing is so frequently mentioned as goals in Ford SGF. But that's also, I think my point is that those are the sorts of references that I think we should be encouraging, that the commission encouraged for citizens and everyone involved in this decision-making process to use in the future is if we want to see how we should guide the use of these funds, reference the document as you did. And if housing has an entire chapter specifically on housing in Ford SGF with these goals, and if that doesn't make an allowable use under the comprehensive plan, I don't know what would make something allowable use under the comprehensive plan. I think it is as clear as possible. And my concern is that if something as clear as this has to have clarification to say it's an allowable expense, and as people are referencing the Ford SGF plan in the future, if it doesn't mention that it's an allowable expense, then it creates lack of clarity around how we use this document.
Mr. Jensen to close, and then we will vote.
I don't have any further comments. Thank you, though.
In that case, does everyone understand the amendment? Please vote. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no. Please call the roll. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
No.
No. The amendment fails. Council will vote on this bill on August 5. Council Bill 2024-146.
Council Bill 2024